The iron door slammed shut behind Marcus Holloway with a finality that echoed through the vast stone chamber like a death knell. He didn't turn around. There was no point. The heavy bolt sliding into place on the other side told him everything he needed to know. There would be no escape through that door, not unless someone on the outside willed it. And the people who had brought him here had made it abundantly clear that his exit depended entirely on what happened in the hours to come. Marcus stood perfectly still, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The chamber stretched before him like something pulled from a fever dream, ancient and impossibly grand, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into darkness above. Stone columns rose like the bones of some colossal beast, their surfaces carved with symbols he couldn't decipher, worn smooth by centuries of existence. The walls themselves seemed to breathe with age, every crack and crevice holding secrets that predated modern civilization. But it wasn't the architecture that made his heart thunder against his ribs. It was them. 7 vampire women stood arranged in a loose semicircle before him, and the sight of them stole the breath from his lungs. They were simultaneously the most beautiful and most terrifying beings he had ever witnessed. Each stood with an otherworldly grace that made ordinary human movement seem clumsy by comparison. Their skin was pale as moonlight on snow, flawless and luminous in the dim candlelight that provided the chamber's only illumination. Dozens of red candles burned throughout the space, their flames casting dancing shadows that made everything seem alive and shifting. The vampire's eyes, every single pair, glowed with an inner crimson light, like embers in the darkness. Those eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously like prey and like the most fascinating thing they had ever encountered. Their expressions ranged across a spectrum of predatory interest. Some gazed at him with open curiosity, tilting their heads like cats examining a particularly intriguing mouse. Others wore smiles that revealed just the hint of elongated canines, sharp and deadly. Still others watched him with an amusement that suggested they already knew how this night would end. Each vampire woman wore a gown that seemed crafted from shadow and silk, flowing dark dresses that combined medieval elegance with something darker, more primal. The garments moved around them like living things, responding to movements Marcus couldn't see, catching the candlelight in ways that defied normal physics. Some dresses were deep crimson, others midnight black, a few the color of dried blood or dark wine. Intricate embroidery traced patterns across the fabric. Thorns and roses, Celtic knots, symbols from dead languages. But it was their wings that truly marked them as something beyond mortal comprehension. Magnificent and terrible, the wings rose from their backs like the sails of ancient warships. Massive structures of membrane and bone, they spread wide or folded close depending on each vampire's mood. The wings were predominantly dark, black or deep burgundy, but caught the light with an almost metallic sheen like oil on water. Some of the vampires kept their wings partially unfurled, creating dramatic silhouettes that made them appear even larger and more imposing. The wings seemed simultaneously delicate and powerful, capable of both crushing embrace and gentle caress. Marcus realized he had been holding his breath. He forced himself to inhale, to remember the instructions he'd been given by the pale men who had escorted him to this place. Do not run. Do not scream. Do not show weakness, but do not show arrogance. You are not their equal, but you are not their slave. You are an offering. A test. What they do with you depends entirely on how you conduct yourself in the next few hours. Some humans walk out of that chamber. Some do not. The difference is in how they face the darkness. The vampire woman standing at the center of the semicircle took a single step forward. The movement was so fluid it barely seemed to happen. One moment she was standing with the others, the next she was 3 feet closer, as if she had glided across the stone floor without her feet touching the ground. She was, Marcus thought with a strange detachment, the most regal of them all. Taller than the others by several inches, she carried herself with an authority that needed no announcement. Her hair fell in midnight black waves past her shoulders, contrasting sharply with her pale skin. Her dress was the color of fresh blood, with gold embroidery that caught the candlelight and threw it back in warm flickers. A circlet of dark metal rested on her brow, set with a single ruby that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. When she spoke, her voice filled the chamber with a richness that made Marcus think of ancient music, of songs sung in the courts of long-dead kings. "A human," she said, and the word carried layers of meaning, curiosity, amusement, hunger, and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. How delightfully unexpected. "Do you know why you are here, little mortal?" Marcus found his voice, surprised that it came out steady. "I was told I was selected. I was told this was an honor, though no one would explain what kind of honor involves being locked in a room with—" He gestured at them, at their predatory beauty, their inhuman perfection. "With ladies such as yourselves." A ripple of laughter moved through the group, musical and dangerous, like crystal bells with razor edges. "Ladies," one of the vampires repeated, her voice carrying a mocking lilt. She was slender even by their standards, with silver blonde hair that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her wings were a deep purple-black, and she kept them partially spread in a display that Marcus suspected was meant to intimidate. Such quaint terminology. We have been called many things across the centuries, but ladies is among the more amusing. "What would you prefer?" Marcus asked, and immediately wondered if the question was too bold. But the lead vampire, the one with the circlet, smiled, and there was genuine pleasure in the expression. "Boldness. Good. We have no use for cowering, whimpering creatures." She began to circle him slowly, her movements predatory and assessing. The other vampires shifted, adjusting their positions to maintain the semicircle as their apparent leader moved. "You may call us what we are. We are vampires. We are the bloodborne. We are the daughters of eternal night. I am Seraphine, first among this coven, and these are my sisters in darkness." As Seraphine circled him, Marcus forced himself to remain still, to turn his head and follow her with his eyes but not to pivot his entire body like a nervous rabbit. He could feel the weight of all their gazes on him, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "As for why you are here," Seraphine continued, completing her circle and coming to stand directly in front of him once more, "that is a more complex question than you might imagine. Tell me, Marcus Holloway. Yes, we know your name, we know many things about you. What do you know of our kind? What stories did your human society tell you about vampires?" Marcus swallowed, considering his words carefully. The truth seemed safer than any lie. "Contradictions," he said. "Some stories say you're monsters who drain humans of blood and life. Others say you're cursed beings, tragic and romantic. Some claim you're demons, others say you're just humans with a disease. The scientific community insists you don't exist at all, that you're myth and legend. But I'm standing here, so clearly they're wrong about that last part." Another ripple of laughter, this time with less mockery in it. "Contradictions," Seraphine repeated, seeming pleased by the answer. "Yes. That is more honest than most humans manage. We are all of those things, Marcus. We are monsters, make no mistake about that. We have killed more humans than you could count in 10 lifetimes. We are also tragic, in our way, separated from the daylight, from aging, from the simple mortality that gives human life its sweetness. We are cursed and we are blessed. We are demons and we are simply beings trying to survive in a world that was not made for us." She reached out, and Marcus forced himself not to flinch as her hand, cold as winter stone, touched his cheek. Her fingers trailed along his jawline with a gentleness that seemed at odds with her predatory nature. "But what we are most of all," Seraphine whispered, her face now mere inches from his, her crimson eyes boring into his with hypnotic intensity, "is lonely." The word hung in the air between them, unexpected and profoundly sad. Seraphine stepped back, and Marcus realized he had been holding his breath again. She turned to face her sisters, her wings spreading wide in a gesture that seemed both protective and inclusive. "That is why you are here, Marcus Holloway. You have been selected not as food, not as prey, though be assured that you could serve that function admirably. You have been selected as a test. A question we have been asking ourselves for decades. Can a human exist among us as something other than victim or thrall? Can one of your kind stand in our presence, know what we are and still choose to remain? Can we, in turn, resist our most basic instincts long enough to discover if there is another way to exist in this world?" Marcus felt the words settling over him like a weight. He had suspected something like this, though the exact nature of the test had been kept from him. The pale men who had recruited him, human servants of the vampire covens he now understood, had been vague about everything except the danger and the potential reward. If you succeed, they had told him, you will be granted knowledge and protection beyond imagining. You will see things no ordinary human has witnessed and lived to remember. You will stand at the threshold between worlds. If you fail, well, let us simply say that failure is permanent. What exactly does this test entail? Marcus asked, proud that his voice remained steady despite the fear coursing through him. It was a different vampire who answered, one who had been silent until now. She stepped forward from her position in the semicircle, and Marcus noticed immediately that she was different from the others in subtle ways. Her features were softer somehow, less sharp and predatory. Her eyes, while still glowing with that unnatural crimson light, held something that looked almost like compassion. Her wings were smaller than the others, a deep blue-black that reminded Marcus of the sky just after sunset. My name is Lyanna, she said, her voice gentler than Seraphine's though no less musical. And the test is both simple and impossibly complex. You will remain in this chamber with us through the night, from now until dawn breaks over the mountains beyond these walls. During that time we will speak with you, question you, observe you. We will test your resolve, your intelligence, your capacity for understanding things that exist outside human comprehension. And yes, we will test your fear. She moved closer, and Marcus saw a sadness in her eyes that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. We will push you to your limits, Marcus. We will show you aspects of our nature that might horrify you. We will tempt you, challenge you, perhaps even hurt you, though not permanently unless you give us cause. And through all of this you must remain yourself. You must not break into mindless terror, but neither must you pretend to be unafraid. You must not grovel, but neither must you challenge us with false bravado. You must be genuinely, authentically human in all its messy, complicated glory. And if I succeed? Marcus asked. Seraphine's smile was sharp as broken glass. If you succeed, you will be granted something unprecedented in the modern age, acceptance into our world as an equal, or as close to equal as a mortal can ever be among the immortal. You will be given knowledge, protection, and access to a society that has existed in the shadows of human civilization for thousands of years. You will be, in essence, a bridge between our peoples. And if I fail? The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus saw it in their eyes, in the way several of the vampires licked their lips with unconscious hunger. If he failed, if he broke down into screaming terror, or if he proved boring or disappointing, or if he simply couldn't maintain his humanity under pressure, then he would become food. A meal. A footnote in their eternal existence. I understand, Marcus said quietly. When does the test begin? Seraphine's smile widened, revealing more of her fangs. My dear Marcus, she said, her voice rich with dark amusement, it began the moment the door closed behind you. The chamber seemed to shift around Marcus as the vampires moved, breaking their semicircle formation to arrange themselves in a pattern that felt simultaneously more casual and more threatening. Several of them settled onto what Marcus now noticed were pieces of ancient furniture scattered throughout the space, high-backed chairs that looked like thrones, carved from dark wood and upholstered in deep velvet. Others remained standing, their wings folding and unfolding in patterns that seemed to reflect their emotional states. Seraphine gestured to a chair that had been positioned near the center of the chamber, isolated from the others. Sit, she commanded, though her tone was more invitation than order. We shall be here for many hours. No need to exhaust yourself with standing. Marcus approached the chair warily, half expecting some trap, but it proved to be simply what it appeared, an old but sturdy piece of furniture. He lowered himself onto it, acutely aware of how the position made him feel even more vulnerable, surrounded on all sides by beings who could end his life in seconds. Lyanna, the gentler vampire, took a seat in one of the throne-like chairs to his right. She folded her wings close against her back and leaned forward slightly, her crimson eyes studying him with an intensity that was somehow more unnerving than Seraphine's predatory gaze. Let us begin with simple questions, Lyanna said. Tell us about yourself, Marcus Holloway. Not the facts we already know, Your age, your occupation, your family history. Tell us who you are beneath all of that. What makes you more than simply another human among billions? Marcus took a breath, organizing his thoughts. This was a test, he reminded himself. Every word mattered. But Lyanna had also said he must be authentic, genuinely himself. Finding the balance would be the challenge. I'm a man who asks too many questions, Marcus began, surprised by his own honesty. That's what has defined most of my life. I was the child who couldn't accept, because I said so, as an answer. The student who drove teachers mad by questioning assumptions. The employee who challenged procedures that didn't make sense. It's cost me jobs, relationships, peace of mind. But it's also the reason I'm here. When your agents? Servants? When they approached me with this opportunity, most people would have dismissed it as insanity or a scam. But I had to know. I had to understand if there was truth behind the myths. A vampire Marcus hadn't heard speak yet let out a low, appreciative sound. She was positioned to his left, draped across her chair in a way that managed to be both elegant and subtly threatening. Her hair was a deep auburn that caught the candlelight like fire, and her dress was the color of dark wine. Her wings were particularly impressive, larger than most of the others, a deep crimson with black veining that looked like lightning strikes across dark sky. Curiosity, the auburn-haired vampire said, rolling the word around in her mouth like she was tasting it. A dangerous quality in a human. Curiosity leads you places you should not go, shows you things you should not see. The curious human is the one who opens the door to the basement, enters the abandoned house, investigates the strange sound in the darkness. The curious human is the one who dies first in every cautionary tale your kind tells. Perhaps, Marcus acknowledged. But curiosity is also what drives progress, discovery, understanding. Every scientific advancement, every exploration of new territory, every expansion of human knowledge began with someone being curious enough to ask, what if? Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it can lead to destruction. But it can also lead to transcendence. Seraphine, who had been standing near the chamber's far wall, moved suddenly, crossing the distance to Marcus's chair in a motion too fast for his eyes to properly track. One moment she was 20 feet away, the next she was directly behind him, her hands resting on the back of his chair, her face close enough to his that he could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her skin. Transcendence, she whispered directly into his ear, and Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine that had nothing to do with temperature. An interesting word choice. Do you seek transcendence, Marcus? Do you wish to rise above your mortal limitations? Is that why you agreed to come here? Do you harbor a secret desire to become like us? It was a trap, Marcus realized immediately. The wrong answer could end this test very quickly. If he said yes, he would seem like a naive fool chasing fantasy. If he said no too quickly, it might seem like a lie or an insult to their nature. I seek understanding, Marcus said carefully, forcing himself not to pull away from Seraphine's proximity. I won't pretend that the idea of immortality isn't seductive. What human can honestly say they've never wondered what it would be like to transcend death? But I'm also not naive enough to think that what you have is simply a gift without cost. Immortality means watching everyone you love age and die. It means existing outside of human society, forever apart. It means sustaining yourself on the blood of living beings. Those aren't costs I'm certain I would be willing to pay, even for eternity. Seraphine pulled back slightly, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. Honest? Good. We have no patience for fawning admirers who see only the romance and none of the reality. She moved to stand in front of him again, her wings spreading wide in a gesture that filled his entire field of vision. But your answer reveals something deeper. You speak of watching loved ones die as a cost. Tell me, Marcus, who would you mourn? What attachments bind you to your mortal life? The question struck deeper than Marcus had expected. He thought of his sister Emma, 5 years younger, brilliant and troubled in equal measure. He thought of his few close friends scattered across the country, connected now mostly through occasional messages and yearly gatherings. He thought of his parents, both gone now, his mother to cancer 3 years ago, his father to a heart attack just 6 months past. My sister, Marcus said quietly. Emma. She's the only family I have left. We're not particularly close. We went through a difficult period after our parents died, said things we probably shouldn't have. But she's still the person in this world who shares my history, who remembers the same childhood, who understands where I came from. Losing her to time while I remained would be, he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Lyanna leaned forward in her chair, and when she spoke, her voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with her predatory nature. Would be unbearable, she finished for him. Yes, we know. Each of us in this chamber has experienced that loss, Marcus. Some of us many times over. She rose from her chair and moved closer, kneeling beside Marcus so that their eyes were level. Up close, he could see details he had missed before, the way her crimson eyes had flecks of gold in them, the faint pattern of veins just visible beneath her pale skin, the way her lips were tinged with the faintest hint of blue, as if she were perpetually cold. I had a sister once, Lyanna said softly. Human like I was human before my transformation. Her name was Catherine and she was everything good in the world, kind, generous, full of laughter. When I became what I am now, I thought I could keep her in my life. I thought I could hide my nature, visit her under cover of darkness, maintain our bond despite what I had become. For a few years it worked. But she aged, Marcus. Every time I saw her, she was older, first barely noticeably, then undeniably. Lines appeared around her eyes. Her hair began to gray. Her movements slowed. And I remained exactly as I had been the night of my transformation, frozen at 23 years old, unchanging, unaging. Lyanna's voice cracked slightly, and Marcus was startled to see what looked like tears gathering in her eyes, though they were the color of blood. The night she died, she was 81 years old. I held her hand as she passed, this ancient woman who had once been my younger sister. She looked at me with her failing eyesight and whispered, "I'm sorry I got old, Lyanna. I'm sorry I couldn't stay young with you." Those were her last words. An apology for being human. For living a natural life and dying a natural death. The chamber was silent except for the soft guttering of candles. Marcus felt the weight of Lyanna's story, the centuries of grief compressed into a few spoken sentences. He understood now, at least partially, what Seraphine had meant when she called them lonely. "How long ago?" Marcus asked quietly. 217 years, Lyanna replied. "And I remember it as if it were yesterday." That is another cost of immortality, Marcus. Not only do you watch those you love die, but you remember every detail of their passing with perfect clarity for centuries beyond. Grief does not fade for us as it does for humans. It simply accumulates, layer upon layer, until you carry an ocean of sorrow inside you. A different vampire spoke up, her voice sharp enough to cut through the melancholy that had settled over the chamber. It was the silver-blonde one with the purple-black wings who had mocked Marcus's use of the word ladies earlier. She remained in her position on the far side of the semicircle, but her voice carried easily across the space. "Enough mourning, Lyanna. We are not here to drown the human in our tears." She fixed Marcus with a gaze that was calculating and cold. "I am Morgana, and I have little patience for sentimentality. Let me ask you something more practical, Marcus Holloway. You say you seek understanding, but understanding requires trust. Why should we trust you? You are human. Your kind has hunted us, burned us, driven us into hiding across centuries. Your churches declared us demons. Your governments and secret societies have tried to exterminate us. Your scientists would dissect us if they could capture us. So tell me, what makes you different from the rest of your kind? Why should we believe you wouldn't betray us the moment you leave this chamber?" It was a fair question and a dangerous one. Marcus met Morgana's cold gaze as steadily as he could. "I can't give you guarantees," Marcus said. "I can't prove I wouldn't betray you because proof requires time and consistency, and I'm just a human you met tonight. But I can tell you this, I have no love for the institutions you mentioned. I've seen how governments treat anything they don't understand, with fear and violence. I've seen how religions use the idea of demons to control their followers. I've seen how science can become its own kind of tyranny, reducing everything to data and specimens. I don't represent any of those institutions. I represent only myself. And what I want is not to destroy or exploit or control. I want simply to know, to understand. And if that understanding leads to the possibility of coexistence, of peace between our kinds, isn't that worth the risk of trusting me? Morgana studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a sharp, bright sound that echoed off the stone walls. Pretty words. Idealistic words. The kind of words humans use before they inevitably disappoint us. But I admire the attempt. She rose from her position and moved closer, her movements liquid and predatory. Let me tell you what I think, Marcus Holloway. I think you believe everything you just said. I think you genuinely mean it. And I think that when you are faced with the true reality of what we are, not the tragic romance, not the philosophical complexity but the raw, bloody truth, you will break. You will run. And if you cannot run, you will scream. She was standing directly in front of him now, close enough that Marcus could see the way her fangs caught the candlelight. So let me show you, Morgana whispered. Let me show you what we really are. Before Marcus could react, Morgana's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was like iron, unbreakable despite her slender fingers. She pulled his hand toward her face, and Marcus felt a spike of pure terror as she opened her mouth wide, her fangs extending to their full length, easily an inch long, curved and sharp as surgical instruments. Then she bit down on her own wrist, not his. Dark blood welled up from the wound, blood so dark it was almost black, with a strange luminescence to it as if it contained its own light. Morgana held her bleeding wrist up to the candlelight, letting Marcus see the way the blood moved, the way it seemed almost alive, pulsing with unnatural energy. This is what flows through our veins, Morgana said, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality. Not the blood we take from humans, that is merely food, fuel, sustenance. This is our blood, the essence of what we are. It is corruption and power and eternity distilled into liquid form. One drop of this in a human's bloodstream would begin the transformation, would start the process of dying and being reborn as one of us. It is poison and cure, damnation and salvation. It is what makes us stronger than any human, faster than any human, more deadly than any human. And it is why we will never truly die unless someone takes our head or burns us to ash. She lowered her wrist, and Marcus watched in fascination and horror as the wound closed itself within seconds, the flesh knitting back together until no scar remained. This is not poetry, Morgana continued. This is not philosophy or romance or tragic beauty. This is biology of a sort your scientists cannot explain. We are predators, Marcus. We are creatures that exist by consuming the life force of other beings. Yes, we can be cultured and civilized. We can wear beautiful clothes and live in elegant chambers and speak with sophistication. But beneath all of that, we are hunters. And you are prey. That is the fundamental truth that no amount of pretty conversation can erase. The chamber was silent. Marcus could feel every eye on him watching for his reaction. This was the test within the test, he realized. They had shown him compassion and shared their grief, but now they were showing him the horror. They needed to see how he would react to both sides of their nature. Marcus took a slow breath, forcing his racing heart to calm. I understand, he said quietly. And I'm not going to pretend that what you just showed me doesn't terrify me on some level. It does. You are dangerous. You are predatory. You could kill me without effort if you chose to. But here's what I also understand. You're not mindless killers. If you were, I would already be dead. You're showing me this not to frighten me into submission, but to see if I can accept the totality of what you are. You want to know if I can look at the monster and still see the person. If I can acknowledge the predator without losing sight of the intelligence behind the eyes. He met Morgana's gaze steadily. You are dangerous. But so are humans in our own way. We may not have supernatural powers, but we have weapons that can kill thousands in moments. We have cruelty that needs no curse or transformation to explain it. We have the capacity for evil that requires nothing more than ordinary human choice. So yes, you're predators. But that doesn't make you incomprehensible. It doesn't make coexistence impossible. It just makes it complicated. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Seraphine began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound that filled the chamber. Well spoken, Seraphine said, genuine approval in her voice. You continue to surprise us, Marcus Holloway. Many humans would have fainted or begun screaming the moment Morgana drew blood. You did neither. You watched, you processed, you responded with thought rather than pure emotion. This is good. This is very good. She moved to stand beside Lyanna, placing a hand on the gentler vampire's shoulder in a gesture that seemed almost sisterly. But we have only begun to test you, dear Marcus. We have shown you our sadness and our savagery. Now I think it is time to show you our society. To help you understand not just what we are, but how we exist in the world. Seraphine moved to one of the massive stone walls, where Marcus now noticed a series of frames hanging in the shadows. She gestured toward them with a sweep of her hand, and at some unspoken command, several of the candles near the wall brightened, their flames growing taller and casting more light on what hung there. They were paintings, dozens of them, arranged in a pattern that seemed to follow a chronological progression. Marcus rose from his chair, drawn forward by curiosity, and the vampires parted to let him approach. As he got closer, he could make out details that made his breath catch in his throat. The paintings were old, some of them clearly centuries old, their surfaces cracked with age, their colors faded but still visible. And in nearly every one he recognized faces. The faces of the vampire women standing in the chamber with him. "We do not appear in mirrors," Seraphine said from behind him, her voice taking on the cadence of a history lesson. "That particular myth happens to be true. Something about our nature fails to reflect in silvered glass. Your scientists would say it violates the laws of physics, but then, our entire existence violates those laws. However, we do appear in paintings, in photographs, in any artistic rendering. So we have, across the centuries, commissioned artists to capture our images. This wall is our chronicle, Marcus. Our history made visible." Marcus moved along the wall, examining each painting in turn. The oldest ones were done in styles he recognized from art history classes: medieval religious paintings, Renaissance portraits, Baroque compositions. In one, Seraphine sat on a throne wearing armor, a sword across her knees, the painting dated 1347 in small script at the bottom. In another, Lyanna stood in a garden under a full moon, her wings spread wide, the style suggesting it was painted sometime in the 1600s. A third showed Morgana in an elaborate dress from the Victorian era, standing beside a fireplace with crimson eyes reflecting the flames. But it was one of the more recent paintings that stopped Marcus in his tracks. It showed all 7 of the vampires in this chamber, arranged around a table covered in maps and documents. The style suggested it was painted in the early 20th century, perhaps the 1920s, judging by certain details in the background. But what struck Marcus was the scene itself. They weren't hunting or feeding or doing anything overtly monstrous. They were working, planning, collaborating. "The Treaty of Warsaw," a new voice said, and Marcus turned to see one of the vampires he hadn't heard speak yet. She was statuesque, with sharp features and hair the color of midnight that she wore in an elaborate braid. Her dress was black as void, and her wings, the largest in the chamber, were a deep brown black that reminded Marcus of volcanic glass. That painting commemorates the night we negotiated peace between 7 vampire covens who had been at war for nearly a century. 200 years of bloodshed ended in that room through diplomacy and carefully crafted compromise. She moved to stand beside Marcus, studying the painting with an expression that might have been nostalgia. "I am Ravenna," she said. "I am the eldest in this chamber, transformed in the year of your Lord 963. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched human civilization transform from feudal kingdoms to whatever this modern age of yours considers itself to be. And I have learned that even among predators, perhaps especially among predators, civilization requires more than simple strength. It requires law, structure, order." Marcus looked from the painting to Ravenna. "You have laws? A government?" "Of a sort," Ravenna replied. "Nothing so formal as your human governments, with their constitutions and bureaucracies. But yes, we have rules that govern interaction between covens. We have territories respected across centuries. We have councils that meet to discuss matters of mutual importance. We have, in essence, a society, one that exists in the shadows of yours, unknown and unseen, but no less real for all that." She gestured to the other paintings on the wall. We are not simply isolated monsters, Marcus. We are communities. We form bonds, alliances, friendships. We create art and music and literature. We preserve knowledge from eras your historians can only guess at. We are, in many ways, living libraries of human history, having witnessed firsthand the events that you only read about in books. Marcus moved to another painting, this one showing a massive gathering, dozens of vampires, perhaps hundreds, assembled in what looked like a vast cavern. What is this? The Conclave of 1815, Seraphine answered, moving to stand on Marcus's other side. Held in the catacombs beneath Paris. Every major coven in Europe sent representatives. We were gathering to discuss how to adapt to the industrial age, to the changing nature of human civilization. Gas lighting was making cities brighter. Railways were making travel faster. The old ways of hunting and hiding were becoming more difficult. We needed to evolve our strategies for survival. She pointed to one figure near the center of the painted gathering, a vampire seated on a throne-like chair, ancient and terrible in appearance. That is Lord Constantine, one of the oldest of our kind. He argued that we should retreat entirely from human civilization, establish hidden strongholds in remote areas, minimize all contact with your kind. Others argued we should do the opposite. Integrate more deeply into human society, position ourselves within your institutions of power, control from within. What did you decide? Marcus asked, fascinated despite his fear. Compromise as usual, Morgana interjected, her voice dry. Some covens withdrew to isolation. Others, like ours, chose the path of careful integration. We learned to move through human society without being detected. We acquired wealth, influence, resources. We placed our human servants in useful positions. We became, in essence, a secret society operating within your civilization. Marcus thought about the implications of that. How many of you are there? How many vampires exist in the world? Fewer than you might think, Lioness said gently. Fewer than we would like. Vampires are not easily created. The transformation is complex and frequently fails, resulting in death rather than rebirth. And we are not prolific in our reproduction. Creating a new vampire is a serious decision, one that requires approval from coven leadership. Done recklessly, it leads to territorial disputes, resource depletion, and increased risk of exposure. Ravenna nodded. At last count, there are perhaps 3,000 of us worldwide. A number that has remained relatively stable for several centuries. Compare that to nearly 8 billion humans, and you begin to understand the reality of our situation. We are not the dominant species, Marcus. We are an endangered one. The words hung in the air, and Marcus felt his entire understanding of the situation shifting. He had walked into this chamber thinking of himself as prey, as the vulnerable one. But what Ravenna was describing was a different dynamic entirely. A rare and struggling species trying to survive in a world increasingly hostile to their existence. Is that why you're doing this? Marcus asked. This test, this attempt to find a human who can exist among you? Because you need allies? Partly, Seraphine admitted. But it is more complex than simple pragmatism. Yes, we need humans who can serve as bridges, who can help us navigate your increasingly technological world. But we also, she paused, seeming to search for words. We also need connection, Marcus. We need to know that we are not simply predators and prey. We need to know that coexistence is possible not just for survival but for meaning. A fifth vampire spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying clearly through the chamber. She had been so still and quiet that Marcus had almost forgotten her presence. She sat in one of the high-backed chairs in the deepest shadows, and when she leaned forward into the candlelight, Marcus saw that she was the youngest looking of them all, appearing no older than 17 or 18 at her transformation. Her hair was a pale blonde, almost white, and her eyes held a melancholy that seemed to dwarf even Lioness' sadness. I am Isolde, she said softly. Transformed at the age of 17, 400 years ago. I have been a teenager for 4 centuries, Marcus. Frozen in a body that will never age, will never mature beyond this adolescent form. I cannot walk among humans without arousing suspicion. I am too young looking to be taken seriously, yet I carry the knowledge and experience of someone who has lived through centuries. I am eternally caught between child and adult, belonging fully to neither category. She rose from her chair and moved closer, and Marcus could see the profound loneliness in her eyes. For beings like me, connection with humans is even more complicated. Adults see me and think of me as a child. Young people see me and sense something wrong, something that doesn't fit. I am isolated by my own appearance, trapped in a form that prevents genuine interaction. So when Seraphine proposed this test, this attempt to find a human who could truly see us rather than just our surfaces, I was the first to volunteer to participate. Because I need to know if it is possible for someone to look at me and see past the 17-year-old face to the 400-year-old mind. Marcus felt a wave of compassion for this ancient being trapped in a teenage body. I can't imagine how difficult that must be, he said quietly. No, Isolde agreed. You cannot. No human can, because you all age and die within a single human lifetime. You don't understand what it means to be frozen in a single moment forever. But your sympathy is noted and appreciated. The seventh vampire had remained silent through all of this, positioned near the chamber's entrance. She was different from the others in bearing. Where they carried themselves with elegance or predatory grace, she had the stance of a warrior. Her muscles were more defined, visible even through her dark dress, and she wore what looked like leather bracers on her forearms. Her wings were solid black, and her hair was cut shorter than the others, just past her shoulders, more practical than decorative. Now she stepped forward, her boots making distinct sounds on the stone floor. I am Kira, she said, her voice carrying the crisp edge of someone accustomed to giving orders. I am the protector of this coven, the one who ensures our safety from outside threats. And I have questions for you, Marcus, that are more direct than the philosophical musings of my sisters. She moved to stand directly in front of him, her posture confrontational but not overtly threatening. You have heard our histories. You have seen our pain in our society. But here is what I need to know. If you leave this chamber alive, if you are granted entry into our world, what will you do with that knowledge? Because knowledge is power, Marcus, and power can be used to help or to harm. I need to know what you would choose. It was a test of a different kind, Marcus realized. Kira wasn't interested in his philosophy or his capacity for empathy. She wanted practical assurance that he wouldn't become a threat. I would use it to build bridges, Marcus said, meeting her gaze steadily. To create understanding between our peoples. To find ways for humans and vampires to coexist without the fear and violence that has characterized the relationship for so long. And I would do everything in my power to protect the secret of your existence from those who would use it to harm you. Pretty words, Kira said, echoing Morgana's earlier skepticism. But words are easy. Actions define us. So let me pose a hypothetical. You leave this chamber. You return to your human life. A month passes and you discover that a vampire, not one of us but another of our kind, has killed someone you care about. Killed them and fed on them and left their drained corpse to be discovered. What do? Do you maintain your commitment to coexistence? Or do you seek revenge? Do you run to human authorities with evidence of our existence? Do you become exactly the kind of threat I worry about? It was a cruel hypothetical, but Marcus understood its purpose. Kira was pushing him to consider the worst-case scenario, to think past the philosophical ideals to the messy reality of what coexistence might actually entail. I don't know, Marcus said honestly. I'd like to say I would maintain my principles, that I would seek justice through proper channels rather than revenge. But I'm not naive enough to claim absolute certainty about how I would react in a moment of profound grief and rage. What I can tell you is this. I understand that any species has individuals who commit terrible acts. If a vampire killed someone I loved, that would be the action of that individual vampire, not proof that all vampires are monsters. Just as I wouldn't condemn all humans because some humans commit murder. Kira studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then unexpectedly she nodded. That may be the most honest answer anyone has given me in a century. Most would claim they would be perfectly rational, perfectly controlled, never admitting the reality of human emotion. You acknowledge your limitations. That is acceptable. She stepped back and Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. He was beginning to understand the pattern of this test. Each vampire was probing a different aspect of his character, testing different strengths and weaknesses. Seraphine tested his courage and eloquence. Lyanna tested his empathy. Morgana tested his ability to face horror. Ravenna tested his capacity for understanding complexity. Isolde tested his ability to see past surfaces. And Kira tested his honesty about his own fallibility. "We have asked you many questions," Seraphine said, moving back to the center of the chamber. "But there is one more topic we must explore before this night can end. One more aspect of our nature that you must understand and accept." She exchanged glances with the other vampires, and Marcus saw something pass between them, some unspoken communication. "We have told you we feed on human blood," Seraphine continued. "We have explained that we are predators. But we have not shown you what that actually means. We have not demonstrated the act itself. And if you are to truly understand us, truly accept us, you must witness this reality." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "You're going to feed? Here. Now." "Not on you," Lyanna said quickly, seeing his fear. "We would not take from you without consent, and this test specifically forbids us from feeding on you regardless. But yes, we must show you. We have a volunteer, a human servant who has offered his blood willingly. And you must watch. You must see what we are when we feed, and you must decide if you can accept that reality." Marcus took a shaky breath. This, he understood, was perhaps the most critical part of the test. It was one thing to discuss predation in abstract terms. It was another thing entirely to witness it. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Show me." A door that Marcus hadn't noticed before, concealed in the shadows between two pillars, swung open with a low groan. From the darkness beyond emerged two figures. Another vampire, male this time, serving as escort, and a human man who walked with steady steps despite obvious nervousness. The human was perhaps in his 40s, with graying hair and the build of someone who had once been athletic but had softened with age. He wore simple clothing, dark trousers and a loose shirt, and his neck was bare, exposed in a way that seemed deliberate. But what struck Marcus most was the expression on the man's face. He wasn't terrified. He was calm, almost serene, like someone approaching a religious ritual they had performed many times before. The male vampire who had escorted him was tall and lean, with features that could have been carved from marble. He wore clothing that was simpler than the elaborate dresses of the female vampires, black trousers and a dark shirt, but he carried himself with the same otherworldly grace. His wings were smaller than the female's, a deep gray-black, and his eyes glowed with the same crimson light. "This is Thomas," the male vampire said, his voice a deep baritone that resonated through the chamber. "He has served our coven for 12 years, providing blood when needed in exchange for protection, knowledge and compensation. He volunteers for this demonstration of his own free will." Thomas nodded, his gaze moving across the chamber to meet Marcus's eyes. "It's true," he said, and his voice was surprisingly strong. "No one coerced me. No one used mental manipulation or threats. I choose this arrangement because it serves both my needs and theirs." Marcus stared at Thomas, trying to process this. "You choose to let them feed on you? Regularly?" "Monthly," Thomas confirmed. "Each feeding takes roughly a pint of blood, no more than a standard blood donation. Less, actually, than what medical blood drives request. I recover fully within a few weeks, aided by supplements and excellent nutrition that the coven provides. In exchange, I receive a generous income, access to knowledge and experiences no ordinary human could dream of, and the protection of beings far more powerful than any human security service." He smiled slightly, and Marcus was struck by how genuine it appeared. "I was dying 12 years ago. Cancer, stage 4, given 6 months to live. The coven found me, offered me an alternative. A small amount of vampire blood, administered carefully under controlled conditions. Not enough to transform me, but enough to halt the cancer's progression, to heal the damage. In exchange, I would serve them, provide blood when needed, maintain their properties, run errands in the daylight hours they cannot navigate. I took the deal. 12 years later, I'm healthier than I was at 30. The cancer never returned. Marcus looked from Thomas to the vampires, his mind reeling. You can heal humans? Without transforming them? In limited ways, Ravenna answered. Our blood is powerful, Marcus. In large quantities, it kills humans and then remakes them as vampires. In tiny quantities, administered by those with expertise, it can heal injuries, cure diseases, extend life to a degree. Thomas is not immortal, he will age and die eventually. But we have added years to his life and health to his days. It is one of the few gifts we can offer to humans who serve us faithfully. Seraphine moved to the center of the chamber, her presence commanding attention. Thomas has agreed to allow us to feed from him tonight so that you may witness what this actually entails. But first, I must ask you directly, Marcus. Do you consent to watching this? We will not force you. If you cannot bear to witness it, you may turn away, though understand that doing so will affect how we evaluate your performance in this test. Marcus thought about it. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to close his eyes, to not witness what was about to happen. But he had come this far. He had committed to understanding these beings in their totality. Turning away now would be a failure of courage and conviction. I consent to watch, Marcus said, his voice firm despite his fear. Seraphine nodded approvingly. Thomas, you may choose who feeds from you tonight. That is your right as volunteer. Thomas looked across the assembled vampires, his gaze thoughtful. Then he gestured to Lyanna. I choose you, milady. You're always the gentlest. Lyanna rose from her chair with fluid grace, her expression showing both gratitude and something like sadness. She approached Thomas slowly, giving him time to change his mind, but he stood steady. When she reached him, she placed one hand gently on his shoulder, a gesture that seemed almost comforting. Are you ready, Thomas? She asked softly. I am, milady. Lyanna looked over her shoulder at Marcus. Watch carefully, she said. Not just with your eyes but with your full attention. What you are about to see is intimate and necessary. It is not torture. It is not murder. It is a transaction between beings who have negotiated terms and found mutual benefit. Keep that in mind. Then she turned back to Thomas, and her crimson eyes began to glow brighter. The light intensified until it seemed to fill the chamber, pulsing with hypnotic rhythm. Marcus realized he was watching some form of supernatural power at work, something that went beyond mere physical abilities. Thomas's eyes grew heavy, his expression becoming distant and peaceful. The light helps, Lyanna said, her voice taking on a melodic quality, still speaking to Marcus even as her attention remained on Thomas. It relaxes the human, reduces fear and pain, makes the experience more pleasant. We can feed without this, violently if necessary, but we prefer not to. The blood tastes better when freely given, when the human is calm rather than terrified. She moved closer to Thomas, her hand sliding from his shoulder to cradle the back of his head gently. Her other hand tilted his chin up, exposing the line of his throat. Marcus could see Thomas's pulse beating in his neck, the rhythm slow and steady, unnaturally calm given what was about to happen. Lyanna's fangs extended fully, the candlelight catching on their razor-sharp points. She leaned in, and Marcus forced himself to keep watching even as every instinct told him to look away. The bite was swift, faster than Marcus's eye could track. One moment Lyanna's fangs were visible, the next they were buried in Thomas's throat. Marcus saw the man's body tense for just a fraction of a second, then relax completely, his eyes fluttering closed. A sound escaped his lips, not a scream or a cry of pain, but something that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Lyanna's throat moved as she drank, her wings spreading slightly in what Marcus recognized as an expression of satisfaction or pleasure. The feeding itself was quieter than he had expected. No grotesque slurping sounds, no evidence of struggle. It was almost peaceful in a surreal way. Thomas stood completely still, his breathing deep and even, his expression one of almost meditative calm. The other vampires watched with varied expressions. Some looked hungry, their eyes fixed on the feeding with obvious desire. Others looked away as if giving Lyanna privacy for an intimate moment. Kira watched with professional detachment, her expression neutral, while Isolde watched with something that looked like envy. though whether she envied Lyanna's ability to feed or Thomas's ability to participate in the ritual, Marcus couldn't tell. The feeding lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though to Marcus it felt simultaneously longer and shorter than that, time becoming elastic and strange in the candlelit chamber. Then Lyanna withdrew her fangs carefully, and Marcus saw Thomas's throat for a brief moment. 2 small puncture wounds that were already beginning to close, healing at an accelerated rate that had to be the result of something in the vampire's saliva. Lyanna stepped back, supporting Thomas with gentle hands as he swayed slightly. Her lips were stained with blood, dark red, distinctly human rather than the strange black luminescent blood that flowed in vampire veins. She licked her lips clean with a movement that was both predatory and oddly fastidious, like a cat grooming itself. Thomas opened his eyes, and they were slightly unfocused but not pained. He smiled weakly. "Thank you, milady," he said, his voice a bit hoarse but steady. "As always, it was an honor." The male vampire who had escorted Thomas and moved forward immediately, wrapping a supportive arm around the human's shoulders. "Come," he said gently. "You need rest and sustenance. We have prepared everything you need." As Thomas was led back through the concealed door, Marcus realized he had been holding his breath again. He released it slowly, processing what he had just witnessed. It hadn't been the horror show he had expected. It had been strange, unsettling, definitely predatory, but it hadn't been monstrous. It had been, as Lyanna had said, a transaction. A ritual with rules and respect and mutual benefit. Thomas had given blood willingly, and in return he received healing, protection, purpose. Lyanna turned to face Marcus, her expression serious. "You watched the entire feeding. You did not turn away or close your eyes. What did you see, Marcus? What do you think of what you witnessed?" Marcus took a moment to organize his thoughts, knowing that his answer mattered deeply. "I saw a relationship," he said finally. "Not an equal relationship. There's an inherent power imbalance between predator and prey that can't be ignored. But I saw respect. I saw consent. I saw Thomas treated as a person rather than simply as food. I saw you using your powers to make the experience less painful for him. I saw complexity." He paused, then continued. "It still frightens me. The idea of being fed upon, of being that vulnerable to being so much more powerful than me. But I also saw that it doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be murder. If this is how you survive, through arrangements with willing humans who benefit from the relationship, then I can accept it. Not embrace it, maybe not participate in it myself unless necessary, but accept it as a valid form of coexistence." Seraphine was smiling, and this time the expression reached her eyes, softening her predatory features. "You continue to impress us, Marcus. Many humans who witness feeding become hysterical, unable to process what they've seen. Others become inappropriately fascinated, fetishizing the act, seeing it as romantic rather than recognizing its genuine danger. You have managed to walk the line between those extremes, acknowledging both the fear and the possibility, both the predation and the partnership." Morgana moved closer, and Marcus noticed that her usual cold skepticism had softened slightly. "I admit," she said, "I expected you to fail at this stage. Most do. They either break down in terror or they reveal themselves to be thrill-seekers chasing vampire romance fantasies. But you have shown capacity for genuine understanding. That is rare." Marcus felt something unnot in his chest. Relief, perhaps, or the first genuine hope that he might actually survive this test. But he was also exhausted. The emotional and psychological weight of the past hours was beginning to take its toll. As if sensing his fatigue, Ravenna gestured to his chair. "Sit," she commanded gently. "You have been standing and moving for hours. The night is not yet over, dawn is still several hours away, but we can allow you a brief respite before the final portion of the test." Marcus sank gratefully into the chair, and one of the vampires, the auburn-haired one he now realized he still hadn't heard speak much, produced a small flask. She offered it to him with a slight smile. "Water," she said, her voice rich and warm. "Just water, I promise. No blood, no strange vampire concoctions. You need to stay hydrated, especially given the stress of the evening." Marcus took the flask gratefully and drank. The water was cool and clean and he felt some of his energy returning. "Thank you," he said. "I'm sorry, I don't think I caught your name earlier?" The auburn-haired vampire's smile widened. "I am Kasha," she said. "I have been content to observe for most of the evening, but now I think it is time I added my own test to the proceedings." She settled gracefully onto the arm of his chair, close enough that Marcus could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her body. Her massive wings folded close against her back, and she studied him with eyes that held a strange mixture of amusement and genuine interest. "Tell me, Marcus," Kasha said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "what is your greatest fear? Not the obvious one, not the fear of death or pain or being fed upon. I mean your deepest, most personal fear. The thing that keeps you awake at night, that haunts your quietest moments. Tell me that, and I will tell you if you have passed my portion of the test." Marcus stared at Kasha, caught off guard by the question. Greatest fear. Not the surface-level fears that everyone acknowledged, death, pain, loss. But the deeper thing, the personal terror that defined him in ways he rarely admitted even to himself. He thought about deflecting, giving some answer that sounded profound but was actually safe. But he had been honest all night, and that honesty had served him well. These beings could likely sense deception anyway, could probably hear his heartbeat accelerate if he lied. "Meaninglessness," Marcus said finally, the word coming out almost as a whisper. "My greatest fear is that nothing I do matters. That I'll live my life, make my choices, struggle and strive and search for truth, and in the end it will all amount to exactly nothing. That I'll die and the universe won't notice. That every question I've asked, every answer I've sought, every moment of curiosity that has defined my existence will dissolve into the void without leaving even a ripple behind." The chamber was silent. Even the candles seemed to still their flickering for a moment. Kasha's expression had gone from amused to intensely focused. "Go on," she said softly. Marcus found the words spilling out now, things he had never articulated even to himself. "I think that's why I ask so many questions. Why I can't just accept easy answers. Because if I'm going to exist for such a brief time in the cosmic scale of things, then I need to know. I need to understand. I need to find meaning in the questions themselves, since I'm probably never going to live long enough to find all the answers. And the thought that I might waste my limited time on this earth, that I might get to the end and realize I never actually understood anything important, that I was just going through the motions without ever really seeing the truth of things." He trailed off, shaking his head. "That terrifies me more than any physical death could." Kasha was quiet for a long moment, her crimson eyes studying him with an intensity that felt like it was looking into his soul. Then unexpectedly she laughed, not mockingly but with genuine delight. "Oh, you beautiful, tragic, perfectly human creature," she said, and there was affection in her voice. "Do you know what you have just done? You have articulated the fear that drives half the creative and intellectual output of your entire species. The fear of meaninglessness, of insignificance, of cosmic irrelevance. It is the question behind every religion, every philosophy, every work of art that attempts to transcend the mundane. It is the most human fear there is, and you wear it openly." She reached out and placed one cold hand against Marcus's chest, over his heart. "Feel that?" she asked. "That beating, that rhythm, that insistence of life? That is meaning, Marcus. Right there. The fact that you fear meaninglessness proves that you are capable of recognizing meaning when you find it. The fact that you search for truth proves that truth exists to be found. You are not going through motions. You are engaging with existence in the deepest way a mortal being can. And that is never meaningless even if it ends in death." Marcus felt something breaking open inside him. Some wall he had built around that fear, keeping it contained and unexamined. Kasha's words struck him with unexpected force, and he found his eyes stinging with tears he refused to let fall. "But it does end," Marcus said, his voice rough. "That's the thing I can't get past. Everything I learn, everything I understand, everything I become, it all ends when I die. And what's the point of gaining wisdom if it just evaporates? What's the purpose of understanding if it can't be preserved, can't be passed on, can't outlive the brief spark of consciousness that achieved it? Now we arrive at the heart of it," Seraphine said, moving to stand before Marcus. Now we reach the true test. Because this, Marcus, is why we need beings like you. This is why we search for humans who can bridge our worlds. She knelt before him, bringing herself to his eye level, her wings spreading wide in a gesture that seemed almost protective. You fear the brevity of your existence. You fear that your wisdom will die with you. But what if it didn't have to? What if there were beings who could preserve your knowledge, your insights, your accumulated understanding, and carry it forward through centuries? What if your brief spark of life could ignite a flame that burned for ages beyond your death? Marcus stared at her, understanding dawning. You're offering to remember me. To preserve what I learn and understand. More than that, Ravenna interjected, rising from her chair. We are offering you a place in our chronicles. We are offering to make your life meaningful by weaving it into a narrative that spans centuries. Every human who serves us faithfully, who contributes genuine value to our society, becomes part of our history. We do not simply remember them, we honor them. We tell their stories. We ensure that their contributions outlive their mortal spans. She moved to the wall of paintings and gestured to one Marcus hadn't examined closely before. It showed a human man, clearly human, no crimson eyes or fangs or wings, standing beside a vampire in what looked like a laboratory or library. The human was elderly, white-haired and wrinkled, but his eyes held sharp intelligence. The vampire beside him was holding a book, and both figures were looking at it with expressions of intense interest. That is Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, Ravenna said. Human. Born in 1847, died in 1932. He was a scholar who discovered proof of our existence through meticulous research and, rather than exposing us, approached us with an offer of collaboration. He spent the last 40 years of his life working with our covens, helping us understand modern science, teaching us how to navigate the 20th century, adapting our ancient knowledge to contemporary frameworks. In exchange, we taught him things your human universities could never have provided: direct testimony about historical events, access to texts and artifacts preserved from ancient civilizations, insights into the nature of consciousness and existence that we've accumulated across millennia. She touched the painting gently, reverently. When he died at the age of 85, we held a ceremony in his honor that lasted 3 nights. We commissioned this painting. We preserved his writings in our archives. We ensured that every coven in Europe knew his name and his contributions. Dr. Hartmann has been dead for nearly a century, but we still speak of him. We still reference his work. His life had meaning that extends far beyond his biological death, because we chose to preserve and honor it. Marcus felt his throat tighten. This was it, the offer beneath the offer, the real purpose of this entire test. They weren't just evaluating whether he could coexist with them. They were evaluating whether he could serve as a bridge, a translator, a preserver of knowledge between their species. You're asking me to do what he did, Marcus said. To serve as a liaison. To help you navigate the modern world while learning from you about the ancient one. We are offering you that opportunity, Seraphine corrected. Whether you accept is your choice. This test was designed to determine if you have the capacity for such a role, the courage, the intelligence, the emotional resilience, the philosophical flexibility. You have demonstrated all of those qualities tonight, Marcus. You have exceeded our expectations in nearly every category. So now the question becomes, what do you want? It was the question Marcus had been avoiding, the one he hadn't let himself fully consider. What did he want from this encounter? What was he hoping to gain or achieve? I want what I've always wanted, Marcus said slowly, working through his thoughts as he spoke. I want to understand. I want to know things that others don't know, see things that others don't see, comprehend truths that others miss entirely. I want my life to matter, to have impact beyond my limited years. I want, he paused, then finished with quiet intensity, I want meaning. Real, lasting, undeniable meaning. The kind that survives death. Isolde moved forward, and when she spoke, her young voice carried the weight of her 4 centuries of existence. That is what we can offer you, Marcus. Not immortality, we will not transform you, will not make you one of us unless you explicitly request it someday far in the future, and even then it would require extensive consideration and approval. But we can offer you a life of profound meaning. We can offer you knowledge that no university grants, experiences that no ordinary human can claim, impact that resonates through centuries. We can offer you the certainty that when you die, you will be remembered and honored by beings who do not forget. She reached out and took Marcus's hand, her grip cold but gentle. I envy you in a way. You have the possibility of a meaningful mortal life, something I will never experience. You can live knowing that each day brings you closer to death, and therefore each day matters intensely. We immortals struggle with that. When you have infinite time, individual moments lose their preciousness. But you can experience both the intensity of mortal existence and the legacy of immortal remembrance. That is a rare and precious combination. Marcus looked around the chamber at these 7 impossible beings, each of them so different yet bound together by centuries of shared existence. He thought about everything he had witnessed this night, their pain and their predation, their society and their loneliness, their power and their vulnerability. He thought about what they were offering and what it would cost. If I accept, Marcus said carefully, what exactly would my life look like? What would you expect from me? Kira, ever practical, answered. You would maintain your human life on the surface. Your job, your home, your relationships with other humans. We would not sever you from your own kind, that would be counterproductive and cruel. But you would also have a secondary existence, a nightlife if you will. You would meet with us regularly, perhaps weekly, perhaps more often depending on needs and circumstances. You would serve as an advisor on contemporary human society, helping us navigate technologies and social changes we don't fully understand. You would learn from us. We would teach you history, philosophy, supernatural lore, survival skills. You would eventually be trusted with significant responsibilities, perhaps managing human servants, perhaps representing us in dealings with other supernatural entities, perhaps conducting research on topics of mutual interest. And you would be protected, Morgana added. Any who tried to harm you would answer to this entire coven and our allies. You would have resources at your disposal that wealth alone could never purchase. You would have access to knowledge that scholars would kill to obtain. And yes, you would have the certainty that your life and work would be preserved and honored after your death. But you would also be taking risks, Lyanna said, her voice carrying a note of warning. Association with us makes you a target for vampire hunters, for rival covens, for supernatural entities that might try to use you against us. You would be learning secrets that could endanger you if they fell into the wrong hands. You would be living a double life, keeping huge truths hidden from most of the humans you interact with. You would be accepting a burden of knowledge that cannot be unlearned, cannot be forgotten, cannot be shared with those outside our circle. Marcus absorbed all of this, weighing the costs against the benefits. He realized exactly what he had always wanted. A life of meaning and purpose, access to hidden truths, the chance to bridge worlds and preserve knowledge. But it was also dangerous, complicated, isolating in its own way. I need to ask one more question, Marcus said. What happens if I say no? If I decide this isn't what I want, that I can't accept the risks or the responsibilities? Do I leave this chamber alive? Seraphine's expression was unreadable. That depends, she said. If you refuse because you are frightened, because you lack the courage to embrace what we offer, then no, you do not leave alive. We cannot risk someone knowing our secrets who lacks the strength to keep them. But if you refuse after genuine consideration, if you decline because you honestly believe this path is not right for you despite understanding and respecting what we are, then yes, you may leave alive. We would modify your memories, not erase them entirely but blur them, make them seem dreamlike and uncertain. You would remember this night as a strange experience, perhaps a vivid hallucination, but not with the clarity needed to endanger us. And you would return to your ordinary human life, unchanged except for a lingering sense that you encountered something profound that you can't quite recall. It was more than Marcus had dared hope for, a genuine choice with survival possible regardless of which option he selected. That in itself told him something important about these beings. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also capable of mercy, of respecting autonomy even when it would be easier to simply eliminate threats. I need a moment, Marcus said, to think, to really consider what I'm choosing. Take your time, Ravenna said. We have hours yet before dawn. This is perhaps the most important decision you will ever make. It deserves careful thought. Marcus closed his eyes, blocking out the visual input so he could focus entirely on his internal deliberation. He thought about his life as it currently existed. His job as a researcher at a small think tank, studying social trends and writing reports that maybe a few hundred people would ever read. His small apartment with its overflowing bookshelves. His handful of friends who thought he was too intense, too questioning, too unwilling to just relax and enjoy life. His sister Emma, with whom he barely spoke anymore after their arguments about their parents' estate and what they represented. It was a fine life. A safe life. A life that might last another 40 or 50 years if he was lucky, producing minor insights and small impacts, and then he would die and be forgotten within a generation. Now he thought about what was being offered: danger and knowledge, risk and meaning, a double life that would be exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. He would be forever changed, forever different from ordinary humans. He would carry secrets that would isolate him from those who couldn't know. He would live knowing that beings who fed on human blood considered him valuable enough to protect. But he would also matter. His work would have impact. His insights would be preserved. His life would connect to something larger and longer lasting than any single human existence could achieve. And wasn't that what he had always wanted? Hadn't he spent his entire life preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity, even without knowing it existed? Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Seraphine. I accept, he said, his voice clear and steady. I accept your offer. I want to be your bridge, your liaison, your student and advisor. I want to learn from you and help you and be part of something that outlasts my brief time in this world. I want my life to mean something, and I believe you can help me achieve that. The change in the chamber was immediate. The vampires collectively relaxed, their postures softening, their expressions shifting from evaluative to welcoming. Several of them smiled, genuine smiles, not the predatory grins Marcus had seen earlier. Seraphine stood and extended her hand to Marcus. He took it, rising from his chair, and she pulled him into an embrace that was cold but somehow comforting, like being wrapped in winter moonlight. Welcome, she whispered into his ear. Welcome to the threshold between worlds, Marcus Holloway. Your life as you knew it has ended. Your new life begins tonight. Seraphine released Marcus from the embrace but kept one hand on his shoulder, a gesture that felt both ceremonial and genuinely warm. She turned to address the other vampires, her voice taking on a formal quality that reminded Marcus of ritual pronouncements. Marcus Holloway has passed our trials. He has demonstrated courage in the face of fear, compassion in the face of predation, honesty in the face of danger, and wisdom in the face of complexity. He has witnessed the feeding and not broken. He has heard our histories and not dismissed them. He has seen our nature, both beautiful and terrible, and chosen to stand with us regardless. By the old laws and the ancient traditions, I declare him accepted into our circle. He is to be granted the title of Threshold Walker, one who stands between our world and the human world, belonging fully to neither but connected to both. The other vampires responded in unison, their voices creating a harmony that seemed almost musical, so witnessed, so acknowledged, so sealed. Marcus felt a shiver run through him, not of cold or fear but of something else. Recognition, perhaps, that something profound had just occurred, that he had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. Ravenna moved forward, producing from somewhere within her dark dress a small leather-bound book. The volume was clearly ancient, its cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed. She opened it to a page near the back, where Marcus could see names written in various hands, spanning what looked like different centuries based on the evolution of handwriting styles. This is the Chronicle of Bridges, Ravenna explained. Every human who has served as a liaison between our coven and the mortal world is recorded here. Some served for only a few years before death or retirement. Others served for decades. All are remembered, all are honored. Your name will now join theirs. She produced a pen, modern, Marcus noted, not some ancient quill, and offered it to him. Write your name, she instructed. In your own hand. Make your mark in our history. Marcus took the pen with trembling fingers. The page before him showed perhaps 20 names, the most recent dated 1987, over 35 years ago. Had it really been that long since the coven had found someone suitable? The weight of that realization settled over him even as he bent to write. Marcus Holloway, he inscribed carefully, and then the date, November 17, 2024. As he lifted the pen from the page, he saw something extraordinary. The ink seemed to shimmer for a moment, taking on a faint luminescence before settling into normal black. The effect lasted only a second or two, but all the vampires saw it and nodded with satisfaction. "The book acknowledges you," Lyanna said softly. "It is bound with old magic, designed to recognize truth. If you had written your name without genuine commitment, the ink would not have taken. But you wrote with true intent, and the book accepted you." Ravenna closed the volume carefully and tucked it away. "Now," she said, "we must establish the practical terms of your service. This is not slavery, Marcus. You are not our thrall or our prisoner. You are our partner in this endeavor, and as such you have both rights and responsibilities." Kira produced a rolled parchment, actual parchment, Marcus noted, not paper, and spread it on a nearby table. The document was covered in flowing script that looked handwritten in multiple languages. "This is the covenant," Kira explained. "A contract, if you will, outlining the terms of your relationship with this coven. It was drafted centuries ago and has been refined over time to protect both parties. I will summarize the key points, and you may ask questions before you accept." She began reading, her voice crisp and professional. "First, secrecy. You will not reveal the existence of this coven or any vampire to any human without explicit permission from coven leadership. This protection extends even under duress. If you are captured or tortured or coerced, you are expected to die rather than betray us. In exchange, we will ensure that you have resources and training to avoid capture, and we will make every effort to rescue you should you be taken." Marcus nodded slowly. That was harsh but understandable. "Agreed," he said. Kira continued, "Second, availability. You will make yourself available to the coven at minimum once per week, more often if urgent situations arise. We understand that you have a human life and human responsibilities, and we will work around those when possible. But the coven's needs take priority in matters of genuine importance. In exchange, you will be compensated generously, a stipend that will allow you to reduce your regular work hours if you choose, giving you more time for your duties to us." "How generous is generous?" Marcus asked, deciding to be practical. Morgana smiled slightly. "We are very old, Marcus, and we have accumulated considerable wealth across centuries. You will receive the equivalent of a comfortable six-figure salary, adjusted for inflation annually, deposited into accounts we will establish for you. Enough that you need never worry about money again, enough that you can pursue your interests and research without financial constraint." Marcus felt his eyes widen. That was far more than he had expected. "Agreed," he said. "Third," Kira went on, "loyalty. You will not serve any other vampire coven or supernatural entity without our permission. You will not play us against rivals or use knowledge gained from us for purposes that would endanger or disadvantage us. In exchange, we will grant you the same loyalty. We will not use you as a pawn in political games without your knowledge, will not sacrifice you for convenience, will not betray your trust." "Agreed." Fourth, education and training. We will teach you what you need to know to survive and serve in this role. You will learn our history, our laws, our capabilities and limitations. You will be trained in self-defense, both mundane and supernatural. You will be given access to our libraries and archives. You will learn at least one dead language, probably Latin, so that you can read historical documents. In exchange, you will dedicate time and genuine effort to these studies. This is not optional. Ignorance in our world gets people killed. That actually excited Marcus rather than concerned him. Absolutely agreed. Fifth, boundaries. You will not be required to kill for us, nor to engage in activities that fundamentally violate your moral code. We understand that humans have ethical limits and we will respect those. However, you must understand that we will sometimes do things you find morally problematic. We are predators, we do feed on humans, we do occasionally kill when necessary. You do not have to participate, but you also may not interfere or pass judgment. In exchange, we will not force you to witness or participate in activities that would traumatize you unnecessarily. Marcus thought about that. Could he really stand aside while beings he was allied with did things he might consider wrong? But then he had already watched Lyanna feed. He had already accepted that vampires were predators. This was simply acknowledging reality. Agreed, with the understanding that we may need to negotiate specific situations as they arise. Kira nodded. Acceptable. That flexibility is actually written into the covenant. Sixth and finally, termination. If at any point you wish to leave this arrangement, you may request release. Such requests are not automatically granted. We will evaluate whether you can be safely released without endangering us. If we judge that you can, your memories will be adjusted as previously described, and you will return to ordinary human life. If we judge that you cannot be safely released, well, let us say that you should be very certain before entering this arrangement that you wish to see it through. That was the dark undercurrent, Marcus realized. This was a commitment that might last the rest of his life. Leaving might not be an option once he learned too much, became too valuable, knew too many secrets. But he had already decided. He had already chosen this path. I understand, Marcus said. I agree to all terms as described. Seraphine stepped forward again. Then there is one final element to the covenant. A binding to make it more than just words on paper. She produced a small knife, more of a ceremonial dagger really, with an ornate handle and a blade that gleamed in the candlelight. I will need a drop of your blood, Marcus. Just a single drop, freely given to seal the agreement. Marcus extended his hand without hesitation. Seraphine made the smallest of cuts on his index finger. He barely felt it, and caught the blood that welled up on the blade of the knife. Then she pressed her own finger to the blade, and Marcus saw the strange dark luminescent vampire blood mix with his red human blood on the metal. The mixture glowed, actually glowed, with a light that was neither red nor the dark shimmer of vampire blood but something entirely new, a blue-white radiance that seemed to pulse with life. Seraphine touched the blade to the parchment of the covenant, leaving a mark where the two bloods had mingled. The parchment absorbed the light, and for a moment symbols flared across its surface, symbols that Marcus didn't recognize but that felt ancient and powerful. Then they faded, leaving only the text and a small mark where Seraphine had touched the blood to the page. It is done, Seraphine said, her voice carrying weight and finality. You are bound to us and we to you. Welcome, Marcus Holloway, Threshold Walker. Welcome to Eternity's Edge. The other vampires moved forward and one by one, they each clasped Marcus's hand or touched his shoulder, a gesture of acceptance, of welcome, of acknowledgement. Even Morgana, whose skepticism had been the sharpest, gripped his hand firmly and nodded with what looked like respect. When they had all greeted him, Lyanna smiled gently. You must be exhausted, she said. You have been tested and pushed and challenged for hours. The night is nearly over, dawn will break in less than an hour. We should return you to your human life so that you may rest. Marcus realized she was right. He was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline at this point. The emotional and psychological weight of the night was catching up to him now that the immediate danger had passed. What happens next? Marcus asked. Tomorrow night or the next time we meet, what do I do? Seraphine gestured and one of the concealed doors opened. The male vampire who had escorted Thomas earlier entered, now carrying what looked like a leather messenger bag. This contains materials you will need, Seraphine explained as the male vampire handed the bag to Marcus. A phone that connects directly to us, secured and encrypted. A key to a property we maintain in the city, where you can meet with us or access resources. Initial reading materials to begin your education. And enough cash to address immediate needs. Tomorrow evening, you will return to the address on the card you'll find in the bag. We will begin your training properly then. Marcus took the bag, feeling its weight. Everything was happening so fast now, the transition from test subject to accepted member feeling almost surreal. One more thing, Isolde said, moving forward. She was holding something small that glinted in the candlelight. As she came closer, Marcus saw it was a ring, silver, set with a small dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This is your mark of protection," she explained. "Any vampire who sees this ring will know you are under the protection of our coven. It is not infallible, rivals might still challenge us by harming you, but it significantly increases your safety. Wear it always." She slipped the ring onto Marcus's right hand, and he was surprised by how well it fit, as if it had been made specifically for him. The dark stone seemed to warm against his skin, and he could have sworn he felt a pulse from it, as if the ring itself had a heartbeat. "Now," Seraphine said, "we will escort you from this chamber. The human servants who brought you here will return you to your home. Sleep. Process what you have learned. And tomorrow night return to us, and we will begin to show you the true extent of the world you have joined." Marcus was led through a different door than the one through which he had entered, this one opening onto a corridor lit by modern electric lights, a jarring contrast to the ancient chamber. 2 human servants were waiting there, the same pale men who had recruited him originally. They nodded respectfully, their attitude toward him noticeably changed. He was no longer simply a test subject. He was, apparently, someone worthy of respect. As Marcus followed them down the corridor, he looked back one last time at the chamber. The 7 vampire women stood silhouetted against the candlelight, their wings creating dramatic shadows against the ancient stone walls. They looked like something from a medieval painting, beautiful and terrible and utterly impossible. And yet completely real.